Hi, welcome back. This session, we're going to be talking about customizing DP2 using ModifyKPL. I'm Pat DeLuca, and I'll be kind of starting and working with Tom Aplint, who's here with me, and Tom will be doing some of the Q&A as well.
Yep. Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. Thanks for coming. So, like the last session, a little bit, we're going to do a little bit of kind of comparing and contrasting. There's some things that have been around for a while that I want to mention, especially for those of you who may not be familiar with customizing DP2. I'm not going to cover kind of any of the other tools in this session that many of you are already using, but I do want to, I'll reinforce that if you have questions and you want to learn how to do it, we're here for you. And you can reach us either through the service portal, which you'll be hearing about in a little bit, or just by reaching out to your account manager for training, which I think this is the first time I've said that all day. So this is another session where we'll have Q&A. If you have questions, go ahead and let Eric know. You can see here what the instructions are. Hopefully by now you guys have all kind of got that part figured out. So we're going to be talking about what's happening and what's new in an area of customization called ModifyKPL. But I want to just take a few minutes to remind you and to kind of give the heads up to those of you who are yet to be customizing and who want to make changes to DP2 but haven't figured out how. So there's really kind of 5 different ways, and I'm generalizing at very high level. The first is we have a system in DP2 that's called macros.txt, and macros are really about customizing products and output and being able to use a macro to pull a piece of information from a field in a data table. MyMacros.txt is our way of allowing you to create your own. So you would leave the macros.txt as it is, and you would create your own version called MyMacros. And as is true in other places in DP2, there's an include statement somewhere that says, okay, make sure to check this, so that way your changes don't get overwritten. They're yours. The same thing is true for commands.txt, and we looked at a little bit of that in our last session about automation, right? At the top of those files, you saw that, include the commands.txt. Well, this is the same idea. I have my commands.txt, and you can create your own based on the information that's coming in and out of your system, or really whatever it is that you need to do overall to manage your lab. And that's really by design. I think that's right from the very beginning.
Yep.
DP2 is designed to make sure that you could do whatever you needed to do. So over time, though, we've kind of enhanced on that. And script overrides is a way to use scripting so that if you need to change something or modify the way something works, you can put that little bit of code change into the script overrides folder. And I know I've helped a lot of you guys do this. So that way DP2 will check script overrides, and it's the same kind of strategy. There's an include statement in your, in the scripts, the text files themselves. Maybe not all of them yet, but most of them. That will allow you to, have DP2 check those folders. The same thing is true for the user table definitions. What's in those files for those of you that use subject information. The next piece of that kind of overall strategy for helping you save your changes, making sure that we don't overwrite them when you upgrade, was some hooks, some UI scripts. They're the basic scripts, and they're pretty well documented. They are also, we talked about those much more extensively in last year's program, and they've talked about them probably every year since you did them.
Yep.
But those are pretty well documented, and those are also documented in the Programmer's Assistant. So that if there's a particular area of the user interface, or there's a table where you want to put a button, or you want to do something so that it behaves in a particular way, we've created the framework for you to be able to do that. So those are kind of the 4 existing and standing. So ModifyKPLFunction to modify a function in DP2 was introduced in version 18, and that was 2 years ago now. So there were a basic set of those that were included in there. But so I'm not a programmer. We all know that. And I don't want to be a programmer. I guess I don't get it. But there's a lot of things, kind of umbrella pieces of this that I think make sense to reinforce, and I think Tom's going to probably do it, as he's answering questions anyway. But the idea here is that you want to be able to make changes using the least amount of code, interfering with the least amount of things so that your changes are saved. You want to be safe when you upgrade. Because we know that labs years ago who were completely overwriting things, when they went to upgrade, it's like, boom, things got lost or things got overwritten. So most of these tools are designed to help you avoid that.
Just to add here, up till now, the override scripts, our convention was basically replace a function in there with something that you've copied and you've modified it in your own way. So when a new version of DP2 came out, if we made a change inside that function, you didn't have our changes, and you probably didn't know it. So this whole concept of ModifyKPLFunction is two things. One is now you can make a change inside a function. You don't have to replace a whole function. You can change that one little thing that you wanted to do. And there's also a mechanism in there to tell you if we changed it. So when you take a new version of DP2, if there's parts that we've changed, it will alert you through the UI.
I actually think I have that as an example, but you'll show that. Okay. So these are the first 6. These are the first functions that were included in version 18. And I do want to say, as a non-programmer and somebody who sometimes has to ask questions or answer them, they're pretty straightforward when you read them. They read kind of as English. And I think if you're a business owner or a production manager who isn't a programmer and you're talking to your technical team, generally speaking, it's like, okay, so insert beginning of a function. They make sense. And if you're new to the Kodak Professional Language, it's important that you kind of use a little bit of common sense, because it's really pretty straightforward. Not what it does, because that part I don't understand, right? But because I didn't go to computer school. But some of the functions that you're going to see, and that includes some of the ones that we're going to talk about as new, I think begin to make sense. They're pretty literal in the way that they've been presented. So that's just kind of my non-programming point of view. So the programmer's assistant, and Tom's got it up on his system, so when we get to the Q&A piece of this, we'll switch over. So if you have questions, Tom can go through the programmer's assistant. For anyone who's a programmer in DP2 or around DP2, or somebody who's got some technical knowledge and understanding, this is the best place to go to get the information, because it's got tutorials, descriptions, and examples. Now, there isn't a description for everything, and there isn't an example for everything, but there's enough for it to make sense. There's enough kind of conversation around what you're seeing that it's an important tool. It's got to find, which personally I really like, because then if I'm looking for a very particular thing, I can go in here and see if I can find it, figure out where it is in the code, and kind of take a look at it so that I can study it and develop kind of some language around what it is I'm trying to understand. So if you haven't seen this, it's off the edit menu in DP2, and we can show you that when we roll over to Tom. If you don't have access to it, that means you're not logged on as an administrator. So, and I know that many of the labs tightly control who has administrative access, so it's kind of important to know that.
Actually, I believe you don't have the debug ability.
Oh, is it debug?
Yep, it's a separate one than administrator.
Ah. I'll have to go look now.
Yep.
I gave myself permission to do everything. So this is the list of the ones that were added in version 20.2. And again, I kind of just reiterate, we'll look at I have actually some slides that give you the definition, and I put those in there so that when you get this PowerPoint, you'll be able to just look at them and you'll have it as a frame of reference. I thought that would be kind of the easiest way to give you that information. I think, again, these also, when you read them, and we can take a look at the Programmer's Assistant, and this is another place that if you want to go through the Programmer's Assistant with one of us, just reach out or reach out to your account manager. It's a tool much worthy of learning. As painful as it was the first time I looked at it, realized I was going to have to learn a whole new language. But I would also encourage you, if you're not a programmer, not to be shy about it. I mean, I wouldn't overwrite anything, but to go and look, there's a lot to be learned there. And there is actually in the folders in DP2, in scripts, assistant, right? Old, best practices customization files from workshops are in there.
Yep.
There's some basic instructions that they were written a long time ago, but they're still valid and valuable in terms of being able to kind of understand where you're at here. So this is my example, and I just wanted to kind of walk you through a little bit. This is the delete function, and just give you a sense of what you would see there. And I thought this would be the easiest way to see it because projecting the Programmer's Assistant, as you're going to see in a few minutes. So its functions, scripting, modify KPL, and then you can see that list. Right above the one I have highlighted where it says checksum warning, that's what Tom was referring to earlier, and I'll let you kind of describe how that works. All right, that was built in when ModifyKPLFunction was designed, right? That's what I believe.
Yeah, we've had this since the beginning of the function. The idea is if you take a function and you kind of add up all its values, you get a number. And if you remember that number in the actual code itself, then when a new version of DP2 comes out, we can make a check and we can see if that function adds up to the same number that it used to. And if it doesn't, then you know that Kodak made a change to that function. And that will be your trigger to go take a peek inside there and see if we made a change anywhere near where you made a change. And if we did, you'd have to reconcile the differences. 99% of the time, we're probably going to make a change that's not affecting your code. But you need to know when to look, and you need to know where we made the changes. So when you do create your own little script override that uses ModifyKPLFunction, you'll want to use that feature that sets the checksum for what it is with your modified code, so that we can see if they're the same.
Okay. So here is the description of each one of these is listed in this PowerPoint. I just wanted to kind of give you a sense of what those are doing, and I won't read each one of these. I might ask Tom if there's one on here that you think is particularly significant that you want to highlight for folks, or
Well, ironically, the one we'd be least likely to use is delete function.
That's the one that came up, I know.
Chances are if Kodak Alera's code is calling that function, you can't really delete it and get away with it. But the way to think of this is, so you have a function and there's code down in the function. So you need operators that are willing to search through that function and find the code that you want to change. Now sometimes you just want to insert something at the beginning or insert something at the end, which is pretty easy. You don't care what our code is, you just stick it in there. But if you're looking for a certain line and you want to replace something in that line, you need operators that'll search through and help you find that stuff. So you're going to find as you look through these that most of them are helping you search and replace for the most part.
Okay.
You can also change major things about the function. You can pass additional parameters, you can change return types, all that kind of stuff. But that's not going to be quite as common as just searching through and editing something.
Okay. So these are the other ones, and again, you'll be able to get access to this presentation, so you'll be able to study them and figure out which ones are the most applicable to what you're doing in your lab.
Most of these new ones came up over the last couple of years because as I was helping labs do this, I said, oh,
we can add it.
I need a way to do this and I don't have it. Yeah. So basically they were, searches and deletes and stuff like that, but they all came about through experience.
Okay. And that's kind of true all the way around. When a lab calls and asks for something specific.
That's the story of DP2.
Right. It's why it has so many features that it does. But it's also why we allow so much customization, right? Why it's built to do that, so that you can do whatever it is you need to do, and now you have a new tool to do that with. So this is an example of being able to change that parameter. And I got to tell you, I studied this to try to figure out how to articulate it. I'm like, okay, what's happening? And from a math kind of standpoint, I did figure it out. From a programmatic development standpoint, I went, okay, I get it. So here's my original function, right? X equals 1, y equals 2, z equals, x plus y plus z. And then I went, wait a minute, why is the z in there? No. But I think, so from a programmer's point of view, you look at this and you go, okay, that's good, I get it. But for the rest of us, especially if you're a technical person without this skill set, if you read through it and you start to look at some of the nomenclature and familiarize yourself with the nomenclature, it's really not that scary. Because this is an example of the modification. I got some things that jogged around. But I think, and I'm actually going to ask Tom to kind of go through this, but I'll just do a high-level, non-developer's point of view first, and then, right? So essentially what we're doing here is we're saying, so here's the name of the function, and in this case it's test, right?
Right.
In our example. So we've got some old code, and their parameters are x, y, z, and then a. So what we're replacing, we're adding a to the parameters that were x, y, and z. Correct?
That's right. So we're adding
Right?
one additional parameter.
Yep.
You want to pass in an additional parameter.
And so then what we're doing is the output of doing that is that we have a new code that's built into that original bit of function. That's added a to my original function without a whole lot of fuss.
That's right. And without modifying our code, which means it won't get altered when you take a new version.
Yep. So, and that's really the key, is it could be something this simple. So it might not take, I mean, obviously it takes a programming capability that I don't have, but at the very least, if you don't have it, you develop an understanding of what you could have, and then you could potentially hire, maybe a third party, or ask, or understand even the place to start. What question is it that you need to ask? Which I think is really an important part of understanding how to customize DP2, right? We get that all the time. Can I have a custom macro? We just got it earlier, right? Can I have a macro that'll do this or do that? This is really that same thought, but in a much more sophisticated way.
Yeah, this is more really for the user interface and other parts of DP2 where we don't have a mechanism like my commands or my
Right.
macros.
Right. Okay. So now we're ready for Q&A. So here were my questions, if we don't have questions. When Tom and I first started to talk about this, my first question was, why? Why would somebody do that? And we talked about that actually more than once, because I really didn't get it. But I think a piece of that why was when Tom was running some examples. So I'm actually thinking that one of the best things to do would be to give you control, and then Tom could run some examples for you, because it was in looking at those examples that I really started to understand what was happening.
So I'll apologize in advance if this is too small, but this is the example that Pat was showing. Now, one thing you might do is come down here and type the function, ModifyKPLFunction, and hit that similar button. What will happen is this queries everything about ModifyKPLFunction. And if I double click on one of these, it actually jumps to it right up in here. So let's go back to, or actually before we do that, let's look at the one called documentation. So I'm going to actually execute. Now this is just a function, test. It returns 1. And I don't really care too much about it because I'm going to execute this documentation operator. And what that did is wrote to the session log, and a little bit big. Let's see if we can get that small. It actually wrote to the session log every single verb and its operators along with a description of it. So that'll be a way to always have that handy. Now if we pick a simpler one here, actually let's do the checksum warning. So if I execute this, notice what comes up. It says the code in ink, which was the function, may have changed since the last version. And it gives you the old checksum and the new checksum. So what happened is, when you made a change, you would have recorded in here the checksum at that point. And then when the new version comes in, if it doesn't match, then you'll see this. If it did match, like in this case, it should have been 2576. Let's just do it. Or I guess it should have been 25. Now if I execute it, I get nothing. So your system will work perfect if it's not a function you've modified and we haven't made a change to it. Otherwise, you'll get the warning. What else? So here's the one you were shown. Let's see what this does. So I'm going to just kind of step through it. So we're just about to call the function. We're going to call it before we modify it at all. And we get back a value. Down here, we're going to actually make a bunch of changes to it. I'm not going to step through every single one of these, but let's see what does happen. So the value I had before was 7 when I called it. I called it right up there. If I call it again after the change, I now get a value that's actually a text string. So we changed just about everything in this routine that you could. We changed the math, we changed the number of parameters, the type of return. And let's look in the session log. We put in a statement that logged the function before we modified it. I apologize for all these extra carriage returns in here. It's just part of our logging that does it. But then we made all the changes. Let's see, we're going to have to go back up here. Actually, let me just run this thing to complete. Okay. Oh, I guess I must have it turned off. But anyway, here we are logging what the function looked like before we made the change. Oh, I guess this is just a typo. Okay, so here's the function before. That looks like it after. I'm going to have to go back and look at these. Okay, I found it. I'm not sure why I'm seeing multiple logging, but this was the simple function with the 3 parameters and just returned a number. Then we made all these changes, and it logs each one of the changes in the session log. And then it logged out what the function looked like after the change. So as you're using ModifyKPLFunction, this will show you what you did, and the before and after will show you if you got the end result you were expecting.
So there's a question in the chat pod that says, and Eric is partially answered in the chat pod, but it's more of a feature request, which is, any chance of getting this assistant stuff in a wiki someday? Thank you.
There's always a chance. That's the first time that's come in.
Oh, sorry. He says wrong question. I don't think I can see it.
I think back in the assistant, what if you want to modify more than one line?
Well, we are, in this case, modifying many lines. The one we did made a change to line 3, to line 4, line 5, and so on. So yes, you are actually changing multiple. Let's see if we can get back to that.
And then one more, can you show us an example of a change made to the UI? How would you make a button bigger?
That I couldn't do in the next 4 minutes.
But if we log that somewhere, we could do it as an example later.
I will say this, though, that down here, there's a button called Best Practice. And if you press that button, it should bring up a PDF. And we should be able to go down and find an example of changing a button.
I think that's in there.
Oh, here's adding a button. So there's a bunch of hooks that gain control when we're doing things in the UI, like when you right-click and so on. And this is an example of when the window first opens, I wanted to add a new button in the view. If I just wanted to change the size, I would have changed two numbers, the width and length at the end. So this has lots of examples, intercepting keystrokes, adding things to the right-click menu, etc.
Okay. Okay, I think that's it. All right,
Alrighty.
thank you. We appreciate you taking your time.